I'm happy to try and do questions for a few minutes, and then I think there's at least one microphone walking around there.
Some of the patterns you showed look like Sierpinski gaskets. So I was wondering if you can maybe elaborate a little bit about the similarity between Sierpinski gasket or physics of percolation and your cellular automata.
So okay, Sierpinski gaskets are a sort of classic example of fractals, nested patterns. There's one of those.
And I just wanted to add, given the fact that you were just about to give up on the ability of physics to predict complex systems like biology.
Well, I think that there are, okay, so nested patterns and fractals are kind of a very important waypoint between what had been studied a lot in classical physics, which was repetitive kinds of processes, and sort of what goes beyond. Nested patterns are kind of the intermediate step, and they're important for lots of purposes, both in biology and branching patterns and all kinds of things like this, and in areas of technology like many modern cell phone antennas have these nested patterns in them and so on. I see them as kind of a waypoint before one gets to sort of the real threshold of computational sophistication that occurs in things like Rule 30 and so on. You mentioned percolation. Let me not get into that. This is a whole, that's a pretty detailed area of physics that has, I think, some applicability in biology, but I don't think it's it's certainly not the grand and unified theory of all that happens in biology, although it's an interesting area of mathematical physics. I can probably, you know what, just ask your question. I can hear you, and then I can repeat it. Okay.
Well, thank you for stimulating the discussion. So picking on your ideas of variable discovery partnered with maybe algorithm discovery, and this idea of a simpler symbolic framework for irreducible computing, what do you think we can learn from Mathematica and Wolfram Alpha for the development of semantic web technologies? Semantic web, yeah.
Gosh, well, so sort of when we try to assemble Wolfram Alpha and sort of get the knowledge of the world into sort of a computable form, it would be great if the knowledge of the world had already been set up to be nicely organized and if most of our work had already been done for us. Turns out that there's sort of an idea that you can kind of tag information out there on the web, and that people who have this information will individually decide to tag it and so on. So far, this hasn't worked terribly well. And I think it isn't terribly surprising, because from what we can see, what we've had to do is something that it isn't really plausible to have kind of individual groups of people out there in the world do. I mean, in building Wolfram Alpha, we've had to take thousands of different domains and try to organize them so that they all interact properly together and so on. And it's been something where, in fact, one of my we haven't started off from a sort of grand ontological theory that we try and impose on all these different domains. Rather, we have pretty general frameworks that are just based on the general symbolic language that we have in Mathematica. And within each domain, we build up specific ontologies and so on that are particular to those domains. And what's then happened is that gradually, as we've seen lots of different domains, we've been able to make these connections between domains and start making things where we can have different domains interact appropriately together. And this works pretty well. The idea that one has sort of just these fixed tags and that can organize everything just doesn't seem like a strong enough idea, because when you look at a lot of these domains, it's no good just to have individual tags. There are sort of dynamic algorithmic things that have to be set up to sort of deal with different kinds of data. It's not good enough, if you have a tag, you can say, this is a base pair sequence. But actually, there's lots of very different base pair sequences, and it's not really enough to just know that this is a base pair sequence as sort of a static thing. You need more kind of algorithmic information to be able to deal with that. So I tend to think that the idea that sort of there are just going to be standards out there and everything will assemble itself, I think it's actually a lot more work than that. And we've been trying to do a bunch of that work, and well, it's hard work. Yes.
I wonder if you could comment on the architecture of Wolfram Alpha in comparison to IBM's Watson or some other similar projects of the last 5 or 10 years.
So, okay, so there's sort of been the IBM Watson project is a terrific example of a long tradition of text retrieval kinds of technology. And I had a nice picture. Let's see if I can retrieve it here. I had a blog that I wrote recently, which had a nice, convenient picture that might illustrate what is going on. Let's see, there's that, there's this. Here we go. Okay, so there's a little illustration of sort of comparison between Watson and Wolfram Alpha. The idea of Watson is really to start from a textual corpus and then to say, let's break this textual corpus into various snippets. Let's try to figure out when a question is asked, which of these textual snippets is most relevant to that question, and then deliver the appropriate snippet. And a lot of the sort of progress in technology has to do with ranking the snippets and figuring out sort of the best ways to kind of statistically work out what piece of text matches what other piece of text. What we're trying to do is much crazier, much more extreme, much more difficult, which is we're trying to say we're not just going to take text and statistically match things up. We're going to try to actually understand the question in some ultimate sort of symbolic, computable way. Then we're going to take knowledge, data that we've got, that we've completely curated, and we're going to try to compute the answer to the question, not just match things up. So we end up with sort of a pipeline where, first of all, we have to turn the little human utterance that was typed in, or in the future where you'll be able to input images and things into Wolfram Alpha, or spreadsheets of data, things like that, to take the thing that was input, turn it into some precise symbolic form that is completely understandable to the machine, so to speak, then take that and use sort of algorithmic methods that have been sort of specifically set up to be able to compute based on the representation of the question, what's the answer to the question. So it's something where we're really, another thing that's of course clear about that is that we can compute answers to questions that were never asked before, where no question like that was ever asked before. But we have the algorithm that allows us to compute the answer. That's very different from what you get with text retrieval, for example, where the answer better be a little snippet of text that's sitting somewhere near some other piece of text that you can recognize. Actually, the sort of the text retrieval methodology is very similar to search engine methodology. They kind of diverged maybe 20 years ago now, the search engines went along the line of saying, we want to give you a pointer to the pages that contain the snippets that you're interested in. Text retrieval kind of is going in the direction of we want to actually deliver to you the best final snippet, slightly different, but it's sort of the same kind of tradition, and it's a different tradition from the kind of the let's compute everything tradition, which is what we're trying to do. Maybe one last.
Hello. In pharmaceutical development, the most expensive thing is to make a mistake and to make it late. Our drugs very, very often fail in the latest stages or even at the market. And when you have a computational universe and you're searching within that universe, if you find a solution, great, then you know you have it. But what if you haven't found it for a while? How difficult is it fundamentally to tell whether you haven't found it because there isn't one in this universe versus you haven't found it because you just haven't found it yet or there's a specific data missing?
Right. I
think that would be very financially certainly advantageous, but also more effective in terms of developing drugs.
Right, so there are lots of issues of the practicalities of drug development which are sort of beyond the scope of things that I've thought in detail about. But one thing that happens in algorithm discovery, a lot of the time, algorithm discovery as such is quite easy in the sense that you search 1 trillion cases, there are 3 that work pretty well, you can verify them, validate them in certain ways, then you use them and you're good, okay? In model discovery, where you're going out in this sort of universe of possible models and trying to find something that's a good model, that can be somewhat harder because you have this thing, you think it's a good model, it seems to reproduce some things, but then you go on, you look at more stuff, well, it doesn't quite reproduce this, what's going to happen there, and so on. There's one particular case that I think is even worse probably than drug discovery, okay? Which is trying to learn about fundamental physics by searching the computational universe. This is a kind of a project I've long been interested in. The question is really out in the sort of computational universe of possible systems, out in the sort of computational universe of possible universes, does our physical universe exist out there? That is, are the rules for our physical universe among the rules that you can sort of enumerate in this computational universe of possible sets of rules? Okay? So what goes wrong there is something, you have your little candidate universe. You know, I have a computer that's been chugging away for a long time, sort of searching possible candidate universes, and it's not actually that hard to find things that are reasonable, are not obviously not our universe. So you'll look at some candidate universe, it'll be completely crazy. It'll have, you know, 10.5 dimensions of space. It'll have no notion of time. It'll have some bizarre exponential expansion thing. Definitely not our universe. But it doesn't take that much effort to find ones which are not obviously not our universe. But then what do they actually do? The answer is they kind of bubble around. They do complicated things. You follow them for 1 billion steps. They make trillions of nodes. They do all kinds of things. And then you say, well, is this actually our universe, or is it something that has nothing to do with our universe? Well, it's hard to tell. And this is another symptom of computational irreducibility, that there's no real way to sort of speed up that process of actually telling what this candidate universe is going to do. And we don't get to follow it for as long as we followed the real universe. So we have to kind of somehow accelerate it, somehow figure out, somehow sort of deduce some effective physical laws and see whether the ones for this candidate universe correspond to the ones for the real universe. So I think that's that's probably an even harder case than the drug discovery case. I think that you know, clearly, from a very practical point of view, a lot of what the more we know, the more data we have about what will actually happen in actual systems, and the more we can actually simulate what's going to happen, the more likely we are to catch the issues that happen at late stages earlier. And I think that's you know, that's kind of the practical direction to go in with all this stuff. But from a theoretical point of view, I just tell you that there's at least one case that's probably harder than your case, which is the whole universe case. Okay, thank you.